I think, and I'm a historian by training, so I always go back to the beginning because I don't like to start in the middle of a story because you miss the context. The beginning. The beginning actually goes back to World War II. Prior to World War II, the Molotov-Ribbentrop German name pact that basically divided Poland up in 1939 between Germany and the Soviet Union. Because of this pact, the way Poland was divided, Eastern Poland became Western Ukraine, and so it was this artificial entity that was lobbed onto Western Ukraine, and the population of Eastern Poland, also it's known in history as Galicia, has been very resentful of the Soviet rule. And when the Germans invaded the Soviet Union in June of 1941, they were actually welcomed as liberators by the population of Western Ukraine. Almost overnight, 80,000 of these Western Ukrainian Eastern Poles immediately joined the German military as part of the Waffen-SS. And so they began to express their militancy in the form of one of the most odious Nazi organizations imaginable, the Waffen-SS, the military arm of the Nazi Party, and they fought for the Germans, and they didn't just fight; they murdered. They committed atrocities against the Poles. They committed atrocities against the Russians. They committed atrocities against the Jews. A lot of people will hear of the Babi Yar massacre. Took place in Kiev. Over 30,000 Jews shot down over the course of several days. It may have been directed by the Germans, but the triggermen were Ukrainians. These Western Ukrainians that joined the SS. They had a guy named Stepan Bandera. Stepan Bandera is their leader. He was their leader beforehand. He basically joined the German cause. They'll claim as a Ukrainian nationalist that he joined not because he supported Hitler, but because he was against Stalin. But he wore a German uniform, and his men worked for the Waffen-SS, and they killed Jews. So to me, there's no distinguishing the two. But in 1944, as Germany began to lose the war, the Bandera movement broke away from the Germans. It began an active resistance against the Soviets. We're talking large-scale resistance. To show you how large it was, from 1944 until 1954, this resistance killed over 300,000 Ukrainians lost their lives because of this resistance. 36,000 Soviet security forces and Red Army soldiers lost their lives. This is a major war going on for a decade. And what makes this major war important is that many of the Ukrainians were controlled by a German intelligence organization, I think it's called the 12th Department, headed by a German general named Gehlen. When the war ended, the United States, rather than arresting Gehlen and prosecuting him for war crimes, instead brought in his entire organization, called it the Gehlen Organization, and subordinated it to the CIA so that it can continue running operations in the Soviet Union. And from 1945 until 1955, the CIA funded this Ukrainian opposition, trained it, sent it weapons, organized it. In 1955, they basically were defeated, but the CIA didn't walk away. From 1955 until 1990, the CIA continued to fund and support and nurture this Bandera movement as part of their propaganda effort. They kept them alive, kept the ideology alive as part of their anti-Soviet activity. This funding only stopped in 1990, but the reason why I bring it up is that when we talk about 2014, we talk about the empowerment of the Bandera movement from a small, right-wing, ideology that had a limited political impact into this major player in Ukraine. And some people say, well, how could you have known? How could you have known this was going to happen? How could you have known the CIA built it, nurtured it, grew it, owned it, controlled it? It wasn't a secret to the United States. So we knew exactly what we were doing when we breathed life into this militant movement in 2014. We supported these color revolutions. 2004, there was a color revolution, the Orange Revolution, that throughout old Soviet rule brought in new quote unquote democracy. There's never been a democracy in Ukraine. Ukraine is one of the most corrupt nations on the planet. Everybody talks about Russian oligarchs. The Ukrainians have more oligarchs per capita than the Russians do, and their oligarchs actually control the politics. How did Zelensky become president? Zelensky was a comedian working for a channel owned by an oligarch who decided, I want to make you president. Zelensky didn't wake up one day and go, I want to be president. He played one on TV, a very popular comedy, I think called Servant of the People. I've watched it. Funny as heck. Really good show. You should watch it. But it's not reality. It's fiction. But it's like if Americans were watching West Wing and decided to elect Martin Sheen as president because he played one on TV. Martin Sheen has no qualification to be president of the United States, but he played one on TV, so we're gonna make him president. Well, that's what the Ukrainians did because the state of their politics is so horrible. But going back to 2014, there was a pro-Russian president named Viktor Yanukovych who was struggling with a major economic problem. The majority of Ukrainians wanted to be aligned with the European Union economically. I think they saw that their future, their best economic future was through Europe, not through Moscow. The problem is the conditions that the European Union were seeking to impose were prohibitive. And it would have required actually Russia to pay for Ukraine to become an EU member. And Putin met with Yanukovych and said, look, I don't care if you join the EU. I'm just not going to pay for it. Russia's not paying for it. So if you want to join, join. But if you can't afford it, then you got to come in and work with me. And so Yanukovych thought about it and said, okay, we can't afford it. I'm going to Russia. Well, the people rose up. There was demonstration street, peaceful demonstrations, by the way, very peaceful demonstrations, the legitimate expression of democracy. I don't think anybody had a problem. Yanukovych didn't have a problem with these demonstrations. He understood where they were coming from. But then what happens is the United States and the European Union come in and say, there's a weakness here. We can solve this problem by orchestrating a coup d'etat that will eliminate Yanukovych, and we can bring in our own people. And these are people that the United States government had identified early on, and we had been training them actively. How do we know this? Because Victoria Nuland, who was the State Department official responsible for that part of the world, has been intercepted with a phone call, a famous phone call where she told the European Union something that we can't say on polite channels. But she also talked about our boy Yats. Yats, of course, is short for the name of a man who eventually became the prime minister of Ukraine. We handpicked this guy. We handpicked the government. We were talking about Yats competing with Klitschko and all this stuff, and who's going to be the best person. We're making the decisions. And this is a coup d'etat. Now, the peaceful demonstrators can't get rid of Yanukovych. So we brought in the people we know. We brought in the Bandera people. And they came in armed. They seized, they stormed police armories, took weapons, came down, and they overnight, they turned what was a peaceful demonstration in the Maidan Plaza into a violent revolution that killed scores of people. Horrible acts of violence. I mean, again, I don't want to get too political here. We call what happened in January 6th of last year an insurrection. Of 2021, I think, an insurrection. The horrific storming of the U.S. Capitol. I condemn it with all my heart. I view that as a gross acts of violence. That's a demonstration gone bad. But it wasn't an insurrection, ladies and gentlemen. An insurrection, they would not have voluntarily left the Capitol. An insurrection would have gone in with guns blazing, killing every member of Congress. That's what an insurrection does. How do we know? Because there was an insurrection in the Maidan in February 2014. That's what an insurrection looks like. It was a U.S. orchestrated insurrection to achieve one purpose, to get rid of Viktor Yanukovych. How do we know that? Because Joe Biden called Viktor Yanukovych in person and said, you got to go. I don't mean to get angry, but come on, man. What is regime change policy? We've never had regime change policy. Why did Biden get on the phone and tell Yanukovych he has to go? That's regime change policy, literally. Writ large, big letters.